Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I will be reviewing the Ellery Queen novel, The Fourth Side of the Triangle, celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. And this book was not written by our cousin duo of Manfred Lee and Frederick Dene, but ghostwritten by Avram Davidson, who was primarily a sci fi author. This book is a little unusual in that we actually know a lot about the writing process of it. As is natural with ghostwritten works, it's mostly a secret. And with these later career Queen novels, there are all kinds of rumors about certain ones being ghostwritten that aren't publicly known to be, or maybe that it was only written by like one of the cousins and which one isn't clear. But with the fourth side of the triangle, we actually know the backstory of this one. This book was outlined by Frederick Dene, but written by Avram Davidson. Manfred Lee, as far as known, didn't play a part in this novel. I mean, he suffered from heart conditions and diabetes and was often unable to participate in the making of these books later on in his life, although he still does write books after this one. And I'll get more into this later on, but this book was a little difficult for me to assess because it's a very strong novel and a good mystery, but I couldn't help but to feel as if it would have been a top tier Queen novel had this been written by the cousins themselves. And I don't want to hold that against Davidson's writing style because it's absolutely acceptable. But when I read this novel, I constantly think this would have been so much better had it been the cousins' work entirely. And this book is still very good. I mean, I had it at number 10 of 33 Queen novels, but it could have been like 6 or 7. But as always, the way I do this is that I provide a spoiler free commentary and summary up until the point of the murder reveal, at which point I will warn you it's coming so you can back out if you need to. And spoilers will be fair warning from that point forward. And I do apologize if a little bit of a cold on its way out as I record this. I try to wait as long as possible, so might be a little, my voice might be a little off, but no worries there. And before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. The fourth side of the triangle is a book divided into, you guessed it, four sections, each named after one of the four sides of this love triangle, love square. The novel begins and is told mostly from the perspective of Dane McKell. Dane is a young man about Ellery's age. He's a friend of Ellery, but we won't really learn that for a while. And Dane is a writer, and a very, very bad one. His books flop, and his first was named Hell in the Morning, and I never really realized this until I reread this book, but I got very strong Raymond West vibes from Dane McKell, only Raymond West's books actually sell. Dane writes about very unpleasant things and awful people, and not only is he a failure as a writer, he's also a disappointment as a son to his father, Ashton. Ashton is a very rich man whose money mainly comes from the tobacco industry, but it's conglomerate of a few different things. It's old money. Every McKell man has gone into the business for a century, and we get a bit of a history of the McKell family, which, again, it's not that interesting. I could very much tell this book was ghostwritten at times. The plot is absolutely something the cousins would come up with, but the approach to it does not mimic the cousins' writing style. And Dane didn't get into the business because he's independently wealthy, because he inherited a bunch of money from both of his grandfathers, so he doesn't need to work. And this allows him to pursue his passion for writing novels that don't sell and that the critics hate. Dane also doesn't share anything in common with his father. Ashton is disappointed and thinks his son is just kind of a weirdo. And I remember the first time I read this novel, I was wondering if Dane was gay. And we were told his father doesn't understand Dane's interests and thinks them unmanly. And we're also told at one point that Dane is contemplating going on vacation to Fire Island, which, if you don't know, is a well known popular Long Island vacation spot for the gay community. I mean, he's probably not gay, but he does have affairs with women, but his sexuality is somewhat curious, at least through these little tiny hints here and there. Dane's mother, Lutetia, drops a bombshell on Dane. His father is seeing another woman. We're told repeatedly that Lutetia is a very Victorian woman. So she just doesn't do anything about this. She just accepts it as her role as a wife. She's clearly upset, but when Dane asks her like what she's going to do about it, she says nothing. And how she found this out is she happened to suspect something was odd, so she just asked Ashton, and he told her, "Yeah, there's another woman, but he doesn't love this other woman," as Lutetia claims. And she also claims she doesn't know who this woman is, but Dane suspects that's not true and wonders if his mother has anything in mind. And Dane is very angry with his father because Ashton is always critical of the things Dane does, and Dane has like affairs with women all the time, and then for him to just go out and have his own affair is very hypocritical. Dane is determined to find this woman, so he follows his father around the city. Ashton stops at a local cricket club, which apparently does not host cricket matches anymore because it's 1965 New York City, and he changes into a disguise that was eerily similar to me of like the Planters Peanut guy. He has like a big hat and a monocle, his little like goatee, and he gives the chauffeur Ramon time off and drives his own limo back to his own apartment complex. The mistress lives in the penthouse directly above Dane's parents. The woman is Sheila Grey, and she's a world famous fashion designer. Dane decides he has to get revenge, essentially by stealing Sheila away from Ashton. And he's able to pretty quickly strike up a friendship with Sheila. Dane's Aunt Sarah, who's not really his Aunt Sarah, but his godmother, is a client of Sheila's. Sheila has a collection at Macy's, and I mean, to me, this was a missed opportunity not to have it at French's department store, which appeared in the French Powder Mystery and had a very fun murder mystery there where the body like fell out of a trundle bed. But anyway, Sheila actually approaches Dane first, and Dane questions how she knew who he was. I mean, obviously, Ashton had told Sheila about Dane, and Dane pretends like he's writing a book about fashion designers in order to gain access to Sheila. Sheila knows this is garbage, but she goes along with it, and they instantly hit it off. They're very flirty, although she refuses to meet Dane on Wednesdays, which is when she's sleeping around with his father. Ashton sometimes calls Sheila when she's with Dane, and her tone and demeanor change when that happens. Dane falls pretty hard for Sheila. He's in love with her, and they kiss, and they eventually go a little further than that. They have sex, and we get some very weird thoughts from Dane as he's constantly think about his father also having sex with Sheila. It's very weird. Dane is just head over heels in love with her, and he asks Sheila to marry him. But Sheila turns him down, not because she doesn't love him, but because she doesn't believe in marriage. She finds it very hypocritical, and since she has a career and is wealthy, she doesn't need a man to take care of her. And Dane is just absolutely crestfallen and gets angry. We're told repeatedly that Dane has a temper. And Sheila says they can remain lovers because that's all she really wants. She does love Dane, and crucially, she says she is a one man woman. And Dane takes this to mean that, okay, she's going to dump Ashton. And he's happy that he's accomplished his goal of breaking up Ashton and Sheila. However, Wednesday rolls around again, and Sheila will still not see Dane on Wednesday, and Ashton comes home late, and he's clearly been with Sheila. The following morning, Lutetia tells Dane that his father has been called away to Washington, D.C. to meet with the president. That president would be unnamed here, but is Lyndon Johnson, and she's packed his overnight bag. Furious, Dane demands that he has dinner with Sheila that night, and Sheila tries to push him off by saying, well, she has a lot of work to do, she has to make sketches for her latest clothing line, but he insists upon it, and he drags their meal out of the restaurant as long as possible, and he insists on going back to Sheila's penthouse, and Sheila relents, but tells him that he can't stay long because she has work to do. And Dane makes a snide comment about that work being his father, and Sheila isn't really surprised that Dane knew about her and Ashton, but she tells him he's got it all wrong. She's not having an affair with Ashton in the physical sense, They're just friends, and Ashton finds Sheila comforting to talk to. Dane does not believe this at all because, he's a young man and he is distrustful of his father and, he knows what kind of beliefs men have and accuses Sheila of sleeping with his father. And Sheila says they are not sleeping together and they have no interest in doing so. And even if they wanted to, they can't because Ashton has some issues. It's 1965. Viagra has not been invented yet. And Dane grows even angrier and vows that he is staying at Sheila's until his father arrives and is going to confront him because he's not buying this impotent story. Ashton McKell, is this big, strapping man, and Dane refuses to believe he could have that kind of issue. And their argument escalates further and becomes much more intense when Sheila tells Dane he has to leave and he cannot mention this to his father because Ashton would be embarrassed. Dane snaps back, calls Sheila a bitch, which causes her to slap him in the face. Dane retaliates and starts strangling her until she's near death. She actually goes limp in his hands, but when he lets go, he notices that Sheila is still alive and breathing. Dane flees her penthouse, and Sheila wakes up just in time for Ashton to arrive. And he does show up with his overnight bag Lutetia packed for him, but Sheila sends him away quickly when he starts asking questions. Ashton had recognized that she had been attacked, but she doesn't want to talk about it. So Ashton leaves, and Sheila writes a letter describing what Dane did to her, and that he's a violent person. She puts it in an envelope labeled for the police should she die not of natural causes. Pretty soon afterward, and I mean like minutes afterward, Sheila hears someone prowling around in her apartment. She calls the police, but it's too late. Someone shoots her dead while she's on the phone with the police officer, so the exact time of death is established. The next morning, Dane asks his mother if, what Sheila said about Ashton is true. The ever Victorian Lutetia does admit that it's true, and Dane is mad that his mother let him believe his father was having a physical affair, but Lutetia says she never said that, and she didn't. All she said was that there was another woman, and she meant her husband was having an emotional affair. The next day at breakfast, the McKells receive a visit from Sergeant Thomas Velli. We're finally getting some recurring characters showing up here. It's about a third of the way into the novel at this point. And Velli tells the McKells there's been a murder in the building and that Sheila Grey is dead. Ashton faints immediately and basically, giving up the game that he knows Sheila. He's pretty quickly arrested for her murder and doesn't fight the charges, although he does say he's innocent, but he doesn't really make any strong effort to prove his innocence. Dane realizes that he had left his cigarette case in Sheila's apartment, but that has somehow turned up in Dane's old bedroom when his father asked for a handkerchief before he was arrested. Dane realizes that Ashton saw the case when he was in Sheila's apartment and returned it to Dane. In this way, he gives a little nod, that, yeah, Ashton knows what Dane's been doing and, not to worry because he removed any trace of Dane from Sheila's apartment. And this could be read in a number of ways, but the way Dane takes it is that this is an act of love and protection. And there's a lot of evidence against Ashton. I mean, his clothes are in Sheila's closet. Sheila was shot with Ashton's gun as she borrowed it for protection. Ashton doesn't really have an alibi or any proof of innocence. He said he left Sheila's early, but then went for a walk and had a drink at a bar somewhere. He doesn't know where he was. He was just walking around New York City, doesn't know what bar he was in. Dane tries to locate this bar, but no one recognizes Ashton's photo. Dane is aided in this task by Judy Walsh, who is Ashton's secretary, and she's really the only one-time character in this novel that's outside of this love square who's of any importance here. There might be another we'll get there. And she's also madly in love with Dane herself. At one point, they actually do have sex, although we're told quite graphically here that Dane stops in the middle and leaves. If this book had been written by the cousins, we'd get this information far less graphically. They would be far more economical in their words, where the point would be made, but it wouldn't be so explicit. There is no finesse or subtlety in Avram Davidson's writing here, which does have its pros and its cons. It's just a different feel to it. I haven't read any non-Queen novels by Davidson, so I don't know if this is just his normal style or what, but it was very jarring compared to what we're used to in these books. Dane is helpless, and he appeals to Inspector Queen, who is useless. Again, you could tell this was ghost written mostly by the dialogue Inspector Queen uses here. His portrayal across the canon varies quite a bit, but he's never useless and dismissive as he is here. Dane eventually appeals to Ellery as his father's trial becomes very dire. He knows Ellery because they met at the Algonquin, and I assumed this meant the Algonquin Round Table, but that was well out of the picture by 1965. I suppose there was still some literary presence there, although what Dane was doing there with his terrible books I think is a bit questionable. But anyway, Judy and Dane see Ellery. Ellery is in the hospital with two broken legs. This is very Inspector Grant in Daughter of Time here. He was in a skiing accident in Wrightsville, apparently. Another iffy portrayal from Davidson here. Ellery does not visit Wrightsville out of choice to go skiing. He's drawn there by mysterious happenings. Ellery quickly figures out exactly what's happening with Ashton and basically scolds Dane and Judy for being idiots over this. I have to admit, the first time I read this book, I also could not figure it out what the problem was, so I guess I'm an idiot too. But anyway, the reason why no one from any of the bars can identify Ashton is because Ashton was still in disguise as Dr. Stone. That's the alias he uses to see Sheila when he left the penthouse. Ellery manages to get his father to bring over Ashton to the hospital to meet with him. Ashton is accompanied by Sergeant Piggott, who is a recurring police officer, whom Ellery calls Piggy here. Again, another thing Ellery doesn't do. And the other officer is named Ziglet, who looks like Sugar Ray Robinson and whose skin color is made the butt of a joke. Again, we're long past that in Ellery Queen, like 30 years past making racial jokes. Ashton conveniently can't remember anything he did after he left Sheila's, including where his black makeup bag is. He suddenly remembers that he checked in at Grand Central Station and that the key to the locker is in the tan suit he was wearing. Margaret is the McKell's elderly housekeeper, and she has already found the key and retrieved the bag. She is the quintessential loyal family servant, and the bag is with her sister, who turns it over to Dane. In court, Ashton is asked to make himself up as Dr. Stone. A bar owner does recognize Dr. Stone as having been in the bar on the night and time of Sheila's murder. Ashton is acquitted, but the celebration is short-lived because Sergeant Valley has another arrest warrant, and this time it's for Lutetia, for the murder of Sheila Grey. During an interview with Inspector Queen, Lutetia does herself really no favors. I mean, when asked about her alibi for the night of the murder, she rambles on about embroidery that she didn't even do, and she watched TV for hours, but she didn't know what she was watching because she was so worried about Ashton not having returned that she didn't know like what she was even doing, and she needs Dane and Ashton to basically answer the questions for her. And there is evidence against her. When Ashton loaned his Smith & Wesson to Sheila, he put blanks in the gun because he didn't trust Sheila to use a gun properly. And those blanks, however, have turned up in a handkerchief with Lutetia's initials on them and a box of real bullets beside them with 5 missing, and the Smith & Wesson holds 5. And Lutetia just has no explanation for this whatsoever. And although she does, once safely in their own home and away from Inspector Queen, Lutetia admits that, yeah, she did switch out the blanks for real bullets. One day, she visited Sheila's penthouse when she knew Sheila wouldn't be there and swapped in the real bullets. Her intention was to return later, get into an argument with Sheila, and have Sheila shoot her dead. Lutetia blamed herself for Ashton's emotional infidelity because she's the stereotypical good wife, although she did momentarily have a vindictive streak. She wanted Sheila to murder her because she didn't want to go on living, and she would die at the hands of Sheila in such a way that Ashton would blame himself. But Lutetia never went through with this. Ashton does not buy this story at all, but Dane does. Dane recognizes his mother would do that, and the state of mind she was in at the time. Her attorney decides Letitia's story is just too ridiculous to be believed, so he pushes this other theory that Sheila was murdered by a prowler, and we're told the prosecutor has become something of a joke at this point in the trial because his prosecution of Lutetia is seen as a desperate attempt by the public to find a killer that no one knows who it is. And the police are just so incompetent, they're just trying everyone they possibly can to cover themselves. Dane and Ashton rush to see Ellery again. They have a letter from a television personality. Apparently, on the night of the murder, Lutetia called into some kind of TV lottery program where she won $500 by calling in with the correct number. She called at 10:22 and Sheila was murdered at 10:23. So she has an alibi now, just completely out of the blue. Davidson tries to explain Lutetia not remembering this because she's so rich and never handles the finances that she completely forgot about this. It's not entirely convincing, but it's far from the worst contrivance in a mystery novel, for sure. I can believe Lutetia would forget this. Do I believe it easily? No. But again, I could suspend belief enough to make it work. So Lutetia is acquitted. Ellery asks to see Sheila's sketches of her collections and asks Judy to help him discover this women's fashion because he doesn't know anything about fashion. And Sheila names her collections in a pattern. The first was Lady Sheila, and the rest are also, ladies followed by a woman's name. There's Lady Nella, Lady Ruth, Lady Lorna D, etc. Her most recent unfinished collection is called Lady Norma. Ellery spent the Christmas holiday studying these things while the McKells celebrate. However, that celebration is also short-lived because Inspector Queen has yet another arrest warrant, and this one's for Dane, because Dane was seen outside Sheila's penthouse around the time she was murdered. And Dane admits this. He said after he nearly strangled Sheila to death, he went for a walk and then returned to apologize, but he chickened out and he never went in. And remember that letter Sheila wrote to the police about Dane strangling her? The police never found it when they investigated the crime scene, but it has since turned up. Someone sent a copy of it to Dane and is blackmailing him. Ashton was also being blackmailed over his relationship with Sheila. Ellery reasons the murderer and the blackmailer must be the same person because the timeline doesn't really allow for more than one person to have been in Sheila's apartment after Ashton left. The only way now to prove Dane's innocence is for Ellery to find the real murderer. He asks Dane to track down how Sheila got her start. It turns out a man named Elisha Winterson helped Sheila start her career, and then afterwards they became lovers. Although she dumped him pretty quickly as a lover, they did remain business partners. After a few days, Ellery figures out, and this is where I have to warn you, the spoiler-free section is ending. Back out now if you don't want to be spoiled. Spoilers are fair game. You have been warned. Ellery checks out of the hospital and throws a New Year's Eve party at his apartment, which bothers his father because all of these people he's arrested for murder are now in his living room. As Ellery explains, only 5 people could be the blackmailer. That person had to know Ashton was seeing Sheila, and since Ashton was being blackmailed before the murder. Four of those people are Sheila, Dane, Ashton, and Lutetia, and Ellery estimates all of them as just illogical. He leaves the identity of the fifth person unspoken for now. He then moves on to Sheila's start in the fashion industry. Sheila took many lovers, as she was a one man at a time woman. She also dumped her lovers often and very suddenly for no reason. As she learned from as we learned from Elisha Winterson, Sheila's real first name was Lillian, and she adopted the name Sheila when she became a designer. She named her first collection Lady Sheila. Sheila is an anagram of Elisha. The pattern continues on with her subsequent collections being named after her lovers. There was a Ronald for Lorna D. There was an Alan for Anella. It stands to reason that Sheila then named the collection she was currently working on after her current lover. However, Sheila just started seeing Dane, and Ashton wasn't her lover. So Ellery reasons her murderer must be the scorned lover she dumped for Dane. Her unfinished collection is named Lady Norma, and what name is an anagram of Norma? Ramon. Who is Ramon? That's a very good question because he's barely been in the book and I barely mentioned him in the summary, but Ramon is Ashton's chauffeur. And Ramon tries to run, but he is caught. However, we have another little wrinkle here. Inspector Queen does not believe Ramon killed Sheila. Ramon admits to being in her apartment on the night of the murder, but Inspector Queen has been at this job a long time here, and he knows an innocent man when he sees one. Ramon admits to being the blackmailer because he followed Ashton one day, but he says he was never a lover of Sheila. Ramon was also blackmailing Sheila, who was paying him. Ellery tries to convince his father that Ramon is just a liar, but Inspector Queen is not buying it. Looking at Sheila's collection notes, Ellery realizes that Lady Norma is not the original name of the collection. It's been erased, and they had the technology to read what was cleared, and Sheila named her collection Lady Edna, with Edna being an anagram of Dane. The killer is Dane, as he readily admits when confronted. He has this pretty epic breakdown here, but yeah, he murdered Sheila because he was angry with her and her lifestyle. This is the 1960s, and the dawn of women's liberation and women's social freedom is coming onto the forefront. Dane could not accept that Sheila was a woman who made her own decisions and was sexually free. This is the era of Ellery Queen novels that explore changing social dynamics. And by making Dane the murderer, Davidson is shaming the men of this time who do not accept these changing dynamics. Dane is a very good murderer from a storytelling and theming point of view. There are plot holes here, as I will get into, but I think this is a very satisfying ending to the novel. To see Dane basically groveling to Ellery, saying it's not his fault, is a very shocking change of pace compared to other mystery novels of the time that bemoan the changing social dynamics and try to cling to an era that has been long gone. And let's get into praise. I think The Fourth Side of the Triangle is a very good example of a mystery novel stripped bare. There is nothing in this novel but the mystery. There are no bells and whistles, there's no incredibly intense red herring side plots. It's 100% of the story, 100% of the time. There are only three suspects: Dane, Ashton, and Lutetia. I suppose maybe Judy and Ramon. But when an author chooses his path, he's going for a high risk, high reward scenario. These stripped down mysteries could be very uninteresting since there's a lack of frills. It's harder to hide things, it's harder to obfuscate. Everything is laid out for all to see. And that does have an unfortunate side effect of readily exposing errors and plot holes, which I'll get there. But overall, I found this a very strong novel on that front. I think the characters are excellent. I talked about this before with books like Cards on the Table and Five Little Pigs, where you have limited suspects. Those characters need to pop, and this love square of Dane, Sheila, Ashton, Lutetia is very well executed. Each character is well developed and remains consistent throughout the novel. Each person's secrets and actions are consistent with who they are. I also think this book does a great job of setting the tone. It's very modern in language, in depiction of the characters, and the way it talks about sex and love in the 1960s. It's very refreshing, not to be speaking in euphemisms or sort of like childish lingo that becomes, either overtly graphic or like not becoming at all graphic, and you have no idea what they're actually saying. And this book is a very quick read. The Queen novels tend to not be quick reads, perhaps because this has a different author, but it's not that they ever slog or anything, but they do tend to take me longer to read than books from other authors. The praise section here is a little short, but this book nails everything it needs to. It receives very high remarks from me from all of these categories, and all like everything I look for in a mystery novel is present. Now, this book is obviously not perfect. I mean, the most glaring issue is the blatant plot hole that pops up at the end with Ramon. Actually, pretty much everything with Ramon is bad. The plot hole is, after Ashton leaves Sheila's penthouse, Ramon entered to collect the blackmail and then left. However, the timeline is just way too tight for all these people to be in and out of Sheila's penthouse within like 20 minutes or whatever. It doesn't work. And furthermore, Ramon is supposed to be inside Sheila's penthouse at the same time Dane is standing outside the door. Yet it's impossible because Ramon has to get out of Sheila's penthouse. And we know he left by the service exit, according to the doorman, so he did not leave directly through Sheila's apartment. And Sheila's apartment only has one entrance point. I also think it's a bit sketchy that Dane had enough time to locate and erase Sheila's fashion designs to frame Ramon. Remember, she was on the phone with the police when he shot her, and the whole scapegoating of Ramon just doesn't work for me because of all those reasons, and also because Ramon is like a nothing character. Like, he's not a viable suspect. I actually had forgotten that Ramon was like this like red herring when I was rereading this book until I saw the name Lady Norma pop up, and then I remembered, and so I had to go back into my summary and add his name in somewhere because like it just wasn't ever a point for me to mention him. And I wish like the Lady Edna clue had appeared before the very end to provide like another clue towards Dane. I don't think it's like absolutely necessary to solve it, but it would have been very helpful, and it would have been a very good clue as well. And I wish there was just more Ellery and the Inspector and Veli. The recurring characters barely appeared in this novel. Not enough for my liking. And there are one or two errors, including like very minor errors, including one at some point where someone mentions Sheila lives below the McKells when she lives above them in a penthouse. A penthouse is the top floor of suites. And there are like one or two inappropriate remarks about race, which, I always try to assess these novels in the time they were written instead of like through the lens of today. But it's 1965, and these comments had long been excised from the series. I mean, the cousins had moved on. We're not in like the 1930s Queen novels anymore. And there's also like Ramon being Spanish or Hispanic. It's used interchangeably. And again, it's sort of like because of his ethnicity, we're supposed to like easily believe he would kill Sheila. It's not great. Let's move on to the characters. And I should say, these screenshots are coming from the one adaptation we have of this novel called Ellery Queen Too Many Suspects, which is kind of a bad name since it sounds like a Nero Wolfe novel, and there also aren't that many suspects. But this was the precursor to the Jim Hutton series. This isn't the pilot, but like a pre series TV movie used to launch the show. And there's not much to say about Ellery or the other recurring characters of Queen and Veli. They're barely in it. And I felt Davidson did not grasp who Ellery was here, which is odd because he does in his other Ghost-written Queen novels. But I think he sidelined Ellery to let this like love square shine, which is fine, I guess. I just found it Ellery very odd, being laid up in bed with a broken leg. He's literally an armchair detective here, and he didn't have any like shocking revelations, and his thought pattern was, pretty simple. It wasn't as complex as we're used to from him. He asked for Sheila's drawings just sort of like out of nowhere. Oh, though there was like a pretty easy out there. I mean, I think Dane should have suggested to Ellery to look there, which would have revealed like, oh, the Lady Norma name. It's not that Ellery made like a cameo appearance, but he needed to be in it more often for me. Our murderer is Dane, and who I found him to be a very satisfying killer. In many ways, Dane is like the antithesis to Ellery. Really, a better antithesis would be Archie Goodwin from the Nero Wolfe series, whereas Ellery and Archie have long been accepting of women's sexual freedom. Dane is not. Dane proclaims himself to be a one woman at a time man, sort of as Sheila identifies herself as a one man at a time woman. Dane has had many sexual partners, and he cannot accept that Sheila also has had many sexual partners. Furthermore, he can't understand why Sheila would sleep with him and not want to marry him. His ego is very fragile and he has a wicked temper, which is a fatal combination, and he serves as a warning to the men of the 1960s that women's liberation is here and it's here to stay. And you better get on board or your life's going to suck. And this is exactly what happens to Dane. I mean, first of all, he's probably going to prison, but also he can't have another relationship again. He does fall in love with Judy, immediately after he murders Sheila, but it's purely because Judy loves him, which is why he goes, somewhat cold toward Judy as time goes on. I guess he's also worried that he's going to murder her at some point. I love Dane's somewhat distant relationship with his father, which is well depicted, and his closer yet frustratingly frustrating relationship with his mother, which I also thought was very good. Dane here was a very strong, symbolic character of the times, and I have to talk about his breakdown at the end, where he really just devolves into this like petulant man baby, starts crying and whining, and it's like, oh, it's not his fault, he murdered Sheila, it's Sheila's fault. And this is sort of like behavior like we expect, I think, more from like really like weak men today, although I guess it's possible in the 1960s as well. These sort of like refuse to take responsibility for anything, it's not his fault. And it's not like he denies murdering Sheila, like he admits he murdered Sheila, when he's exposed. But again, it's not this all this like, oh, it's not my fault. It's like it is. It's we there are Ellery Queen novels where the murderer is sort of let down by society, and society sort of forced certain characters to do certain things, and that's what like Dane is claiming here. Though this argument is rejected by the authors of this book, and that it's all squarely on Dane, and yeah, it is his fault, and he is going to be turned over to the police. Sheila Grey is our victim, and she's a great character. I mean, she might be the best victim in an Ellery Queen novel from a character development perspective. At least she's up there. And it's interesting because she's not overtly complex, but she is clear cut and distinct. We know instantly who she is. Davidson's intent with her is depicted very clearly and very obviously. She is a modern woman of the 1960s. She is free, she is independent in a way that's unusual for a male writer to portray at this time. Now, by this time, the Queen novels had become more progressive leaning, not politically, I mean culturally, unlike what we see from across the pond during this era. American mystery authors, led by the cousins and here Davidson, aren't clinging hopelessly to a past era that is long gone and never coming back. The American authors are embracing the future and the present, and the Queen novels are, king of these American mysteries. Ellery Queen is the American authority for the genre for decades. Rick Stout also up there, but he's doing the same thing at this time. And Sheila has her own career, and it's made very clear she did not sleep her way to the top. Now, she did sleep with her original business partner, but she was successful first. Now, I think you could reasonably interpret this as, since this book is written by a man, the author is either potentially ignorant or ignoring some of the more unsavory issues women faced in the workplace, especially at this time. Because Sheila is depicted as someone who didn't experience any negativity in her life, in her professional life or personal life, until Dane comes along. It seems a little too perfect. The only adversity she has in her life is Dane, and she lost her life because Dane killed her. And, he was prying around in other people's personal lives when he shouldn't have been. This prying around in other people's personal lives leading to bad things is a somewhat recurring theme in Queen novels, especially later Queen novels. Ashton McKell was another fantastic character. I talked a lot about Sheila being a modern woman, and Ashton is also a modern man. We don't see these like older men seeking out emotional connections, prior to like the 1960s, at least in literature. And, you have to admit, you thought he was sleeping with Sheila. You thought they were having a sexual affair until he told you otherwise. It never occurred to you he wasn't, even though you are reading a murder mystery and you know not to assume what you've been told. But each of these four main characters represents a different personality. Ashton is the modern male, Sheila is the modern female, Dane is the traditional male, and Lutetia is the traditional female. And Ashton being this less stereotypically masculine man is interesting here, because he's a dominant position in life. He's the head of the household. He's this powerful businessman who frequently meets with the president of the United States, and yet he has a lot of typically like unmasculine traits about him that are never treated as negative or unmasculine. He has performance issues. He actually does a lot of stereotypically feminine things like playing dress up and wearing makeup, and he faints, and he's really in touch with his emotions. None of this is treated as unmanly. And I found Ashton to be a very sympathetic character. A lot of the novel is told from Dane's perspective, and Dane doesn't really like his father, yet Ashton still comes across as likable. We hear a lot of Ashton's negative qualities, but we don't see a lot of those negative qualities. We actually see Ashton decide to take the fall for Sheila's murder when I think we can assume he believes Dane killed her. Possibly he thinks his wife did it, but we have that incident where Ashton returns Dane's cigarette case, and it's him giving a little nod that, yeah, he's cleared everything up for you. And I think we can assume Ashton at least believed Dane killed Sheila, if not outright knew. I mean, technically, it's a little more complicated because Dane didn't kill Sheila till after Ashton left, but I think that Ashton sort of gets it, that he knows at least Dane attacked Sheila. And then we have Lutetia, who I think initially comes off as a little bit of a dit, but I think when you start examining her deeper, you find a lot of complexity within her. She has a traditional mindset of the good, faithful wife. She stands by her man and lets him control the house and the family and the finances. In exchange, she expects Ashton to be faithful for her and to her. And I think it's very typical of Lutetia to be more upset that Ashton is seeing Sheila emotionally than sexually. That emotional support is something Lutetia probably prefers to the other. It's not unusual for men like Ashton to have affairs. That's very commonplace. And a woman like Lutetia probably expected that. But she wasn't expecting this kind of emotional affair. And it's her traditional beliefs and frame of mind that dig her into these holes she finds herself in. Her inability to communicate properly about sensitive things with Dane leads to Dane murdering Sheila, and eventually Lutetia going on trial for that murder. Her inability to confront Ashton over this leads to the same place. Her inability to speak to Sheila, who lives upstairs, also leads to the same place. Because Lutetia is so ingrained in the women's traditional place, it nearly leads to her undoing. And for much of the section dealing with her, she's completely unaware her beliefs are a weakness. It even blinds her ability to present an alibi because Lutetia doesn't control any of the household finances. She never thinks about money, and she has no sense of finance. So when her actual alibi is that she won money in a lottery, it completely slips her mind. Lutetia's a very convincing character when you really think about her. Although I think, like, initially on paper, she might not appear to be that credible. I think her alibi suddenly coming out of nowhere and her forgetting about it might not initially be very convincing until you really sit there and think about her. And I could talk a little bit here about Judy. Judy, the typical sort of like secretary to the rich man. She's in love with the boss's son. I sort of got the way she's described. I sort of got a little bit of like the naughty librarian sort of trope from her, just from the way Dane talks about her. But she's sort of like the forgotten woman here. I mean, she's not in the main love square or triangle or whatever you want to call it, and she's sort of left out. I mean, she's the sidekick. She's Dane's sidekick when he investigates the murder. And, in the end, she's sort of the one left behind because she's in love with Dane, but Dane's going to prison. Dane murdered Sheila. So she's sort of, left out of things, and we don't get a resolution for her. Like, Dane is arrested, that's it. Like, there's no, like, implication of hope for her, although I guess she's not like implied to be like miserable. I suppose she just continues to work for Ashton. Again, we don't know that. And Judy, outside of the people in the love square, is really the only other character in the novel. I mean, she is potentially a viable suspect. It's not like there was like she was so underdeveloped that she couldn't have done it. She could have, and I think Davidson does give a little like wink here or there that like, oh, maybe we should be looking at people outside of those other three. He thinks we should, but not to Judy anyway. And finally, we have Ramon, who, again, is like a nothing character. He's Ashton's chauffeur, and he's like barely in the novel. He does appear a little bit towards the beginning where, Dane is following Ashton around in his limo because he dropped this whole thing about how Ramon drops Ashton off at the abandoned cricket club or whatever it was and just like disappears, and Dane's wondering like, oh, what does Ramon do during these hours, when Ashton takes over the limo. But again, no development from him, no, real page time for him. He's barely in the novel. And again, like him being a blackmailer, it just seems like it came out of absolutely nowhere. It's not even like really possible for him to have been doing all this stuff, but I guess we're just supposed to accept it. Again, he really needed a lot more development, especially since Davidson uses him as like this big dramatic red herring reveal at the end when either it should have used probably Judy would have been a better choice there, although Judy, is a woman, so that runs into issues with Sheila. But it just didn't work for me that Ramon was this like supposed to be this like last minute suspect here. It flopped. And that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments what you think of the fourth side of the triangle. We're celebrating 60 years this year. And next week, well, a few months ago, I put out a video that explained like all these different ways on how to solve a murder mystery. How to solve a murder mystery using the meta clues mostly instead of the clues that were actually provided in the novel. And someone suggested I should make that video again, but use a novel and go through the novel and show you how to solve a specific novel. And I thought that was a good idea, and I did struggle over which novel to pick here because I wanted one that seemed pretty typical of Agatha Christie, but also one that like people can watch without actually like spoiling anything. So I did decide on Murder on the Orient Express because I think that's probably the most widely known one to spoil. I also just recently covered it a couple weeks ago. So next week I will go through the meta clues and show you how you could have solved Murder on the Orient Express, but probably didn't. And a fair warning here, I did not solve Murder on the Orient Express the first time I read it. Well, technically I did. I had seen the film first, so I kind of knew what happened, but again, didn't solve it. Until next time, Mystery Files.